And welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Flyers Files here on 97.3 ESPN.com and on the 97.3 ESPN YouTube channel. Kevin Durso and Haley Taylor-Simon here with you again for another week of Flyers hockey talk. And it's been quite an interesting week. I think from where we started all of this and the team was winning a few games, it kind of feels like it's leveled off again as we get to the quarter mark. So, Haley, what are your impressions kind of the week that's been? It's been kind of like one of these up and down weeks, right?
Yeah, but that's very typical with the Flyers. I feel like this team, they're finding some rhythm and some patterns and some good things. But at the end of the day, this team needs to really pull out and win it in the end. And I feel like in that final frame, we've seen them kind of get a little bit lackadaisical, tired, fatigued. And that's something that if this team wants to be a playoff contending team, which I know these are the players' goals. However, for the organization, I have other feelings about that. But they need to get it together in that final frame.
Yeah, like they've played competitive games this week, so they've been in these games. It's been like even the Carolina game, it's closer than the score appears for the first two periods, and they just really have it all get away from them in the third period. I kind of call that Carolina figured out what they were doing even more and played to their level as well. That's just the quality of team you're playing. Even less so than the Colorado game, where that was the Flyers turning it up in the last part of that
Which
game
was
against
good.
Colorado, which was good. It was a good, strong finish and kind of set the tone for the first two periods of the Carolina game for what, because I thought the Flyers played a good first period against
Yep.
Carolina, all things considered. It just faded down the stretch. I'm kind of with you on this one, where with the, we're 20 games into the season and roughly at that quarter mark, and there's an element where I fully understand what this team is supposed to be to a degree, and that the record is what they pretty reflective of what they are. But also at the same time, I kind of I'm at a spot where it's like they kind of also need to make up their mind of what team they're going to be. And that really does fall on the players to a degree, because if you're going to be this team that talks about challenging for the playoffs and building off of what you did last year, then you've got to kind of kick it into another gear pretty quickly at this point. And I know there's things that kind of influence that and may affect the results, like the injuries we're going to talk about in a little bit. But you kind of got to figure out what direction you're going in, because it's going to dictate the rest of the year. And you just don't want to, I feel like you just don't want to get caught in the middle of nowhere here with this, that you don't want to be the team that's definitely not locked into a playoff spot by any means, but also not the team that's too far out of a spot where you could get some serious help in certain areas. I kind of always have, from my standpoint, and I think you do too, always have one eye on the draft and
Mhm.
trying to think that far ahead. I'm keeping my eye on that, and I just don't know if what we're seeing now, you have a week where you win 3 games in a row, now they've lost 2 in a row. That kind of back and forth kind of doesn't solve a whole lot for what the big picture is.
Absolutely, Kevin. And you brought up a great point. So, if the Carolina game, despite the fact that it ended up being a loss, the first two frames honestly were not bad. It was competitive hockey. Colorado game, final frame, competitive push. They didn't win it. I'm okay with that. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit, opposite of what the fandom might want. However, I would rather watch the guys play competitive hockey and not get the points, because my mindset with this team is this. Realistically, this is not a playoff contending team. And let's say they go to the playoffs. Let's go put that scenario out there. They go to the playoffs. They're losing in the first round. And why would you want your team to go to the playoffs and not succeed in the playoffs rather than your team not being in the playoffs and getting a good draft pick? That is my mindset. And call me negative, call me anything that you want. But at least to me, that seems like a plan that would actually help the team in the future become more successful. I was looking at the 2025 draft, the different prospects. And there's so many good prospects. Obviously, Hagen's with that number 1 overall, which is kind of predicted at a Boston college. However, there are a lot of good players, and I can do a whole in-depth analysis. I talk to our buddy in the press box, Sportsology, aka Russ Cohen, about this all the time. And at least for me, the Flyers have a problem with centers. The Flyers maybe need some more strong wingers, defensemen. There's a lot of things that this Philadelphia team needs. Why not focus on getting rid of the contracts, the big ones at the trade deadline? Why not focus on maybe just building this team to succeed in future years and not this season? It's only year 2 of the rebuild.
Yeah, and like where I kind of get, not struggle with this, but like kind of where I'm at with this also is that you don't just want to throw away certain parts of this over 20 games. So I don't want to look at slow starts for certain guys and be like, this is worth throwing that away and kind of pressing the reset button on things that they need, like all the wingers that they have that you could certainly use one of these young wingers eventually in a trade package down the line to maybe solve one of your other positional problems. But you have a lot of other guys that you really at this point need to find a way to build around. And like that was the encouraging thing about the conversation we had last week about Travis Sanheim. Like you want to have a guy like that who you say maybe that solves a problem with the defensive side of things. He's not necessarily a number one defenseman, but he's a very key part of it. And I can work with that now. I can absolutely go forward knowing that's a part of the equation. I think it's really like bringing up the draft is such an important part of this because it's not just about maybe getting a center. And I'm not trying to say what you're saying is wrong. Like they need centers. That's very abundantly clear. It's the number of picks that I keep coming back to, that it's not like they have one pick in the first round and it's how high can it get. They've got 3 picks to work with. And like I've looked at some of these lists also and things like that. And this is just kind of an ironic tie into what we're talking about because it came up. I was just hanging out with friends the other night and it came up about inevitably sometimes, and I'm sure you've had conversations like this, Haley, where when you're talking to people who know the sports side of your life and you're all involved in it, you just start throwing out random names of like, you remember this person, you remember that person, things like that. And Branko Radivojevic's name came up. And I turned around and knowing that I've looked at a draft board list for 2025 coming up, I sit there and go, hey, everybody in the room, you want to feel old right now? His son's draft eligible this upcoming year. And his son's a defenseman who's got, kind of late first round projections in certain draft mocks and things like that. And I'm like, that would be an interesting one too. Like you keep your eyes on guys like that too, that you think could be like that late first round, early second round, because they could have a lot of action there with the picks that they've got from Colorado, from Edmonton, the other picks that they've got from teams that aren't expected to do as well, that are going to be early second round, like Anaheim and Columbus. There's a lot of potential to get, to focus on those guys that keep popping up in the 25 to 40 range and be prepared for those guys being impact guys that may be part of this thing moving forward too. So it's just interesting to me how, like, as much as we really want to push the high end side of it. And that's why I even bring up the point of figuring out who they are. Yeah. 20 games in, you may not know all the answers just yet, but I look at the games right before, and like we talk about good competitive games that they still don't get points out of. I look at the Buffalo game that they played last Saturday and go, well, that looks like a game where when you put it all together and you really outplay a team, look at what you can do. Now you look like a playoff team. So are you that more often, or are you the team that fights for the most part but doesn't get the points in the end? And which is a perfect place to be, honestly, if that's where you're going with the drafting, is if you play competitively but don't get the points. They lost a game to Carolina earlier this month before the one that was this week that I consider for the people who are on that side of things, that's the perfect loss. You're in a tie game into the final minute and you lose the game and you get no points for it, but you played a competitive game on the scoreboard and were involved in that game and getting some valuable experience. So that's the way that I look at it. It's just interesting to kind of look at where they are at the quarter mark and try to figure out, we looked up after Saturday and they were 8-8-2 and had gone from 1-5-1 back to 500. And now a couple losses kind of shift your focus again.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that, it has only been 20 games. So it is hard to say what this team can do and can't do. I just don't think that they have the talent to be a successful team. Now, again, I know last season they were, but that was a very fluky season, I believe. And don't forget, they had that really bad stretch, losing 8 games towards the end, which kind of pushed them out of the playoff contention. So again, I'm with the mindset, and I don't think much is going to change with how I'm thinking, honestly, unless they go on this like crazy point streak where I'm going to think just play competitively, get the younger guys reps, develop, and we will see what happens at the deadline and focus on the draft.
To me, there's one way that could change my mind about this a little bit, because I don't recall last season, not until way later on, them having really any big injury trouble, and they've really run into it this season. And as such, that's going to influence results. If they get certain guys back and it turns the whole thing around, and it's like now the guys who were starting to play a little bit better during this stretch, but maybe not having as much support, maybe that turns some things around. That's the one way I could see it, is if guys are really healthy again and you get everything back in the picture. But that's a big if. And once
Okay.
you're hurt, you're kind of hurt for the year to a degree. Like you're still always recovering. So
But I hate to be this person. But do you really think, and I know this name has been thrown around a lot, but do you really think Jamie Drysdale and Cam York are going to make all the difference? Do you think having Sam Ersson back in net's going to make all the difference?
I like the way I view it is like Arison's probably still going to be a better option than what they have going out every night right now. I've seen better things from Fedotov and Kolosov in the last little while, but it still is what it is. They're still trying to figure things out. I kind of like, the guy I wonder more about is if when Cam York comes back, what kind of stability that brings, because it feels a little bit like Cam York coming back, and there's a very strong possibility that that's within the next 24 hours that he plays against Chicago on Saturday. It
Yeah.
seems more and more like that's going to happen. I wonder if that has the same early impact that getting Nick Seeler back did, because it was like the first few games without Nick Seeler, they were lost without having him back there. And then he comes back, and for a few games, it's like they found some of their defensive game again, and the structure starts to build. I wonder if York being back would have a little bit of an effect like that. The one thing it's not changing, where you're absolutely right, is the one thing it's not changing is it's not helping them score more goals. And that's one of the areas where they really struggle. But I don't know if that's going to change something, whether it's just the movement up the ice, if they get that transition game going again. They've had more opportunities in transition. I think they're now trying to be a little too perfect, honestly, with some of these rushes. And I've got an opportunity to do something, could just take a shot. Maybe
Yep.
something happens. Maybe I get a rebound. They pass it up. They have another game like they did on Wednesday. I have another game where you don't break 20 shots on goal, and they easily could have. They were at 11 shots on goal through the first period. The second period had no structure whatsoever from both sides. So it was wide open, and they had opportunities that they passed up. I just wonder if they can get up the ice faster. They can maybe make that decision quicker. And look, I'm trying to pull some positives there for stuff like that. I totally understand your side of it as well, where it's like, and that's not, I don't think it's an overly negative side. I think it's just a realistic side. It's just
Yeah.
being realistic about, it's not like, if you have number 8 back in the lineup on Saturday, it's not adding number 8 Cale Makar, who was here on Monday. Not a talent like that. It's a very, it's a very good player in Cam York, but it's not the elite level player that we've been talking about that lifts your game, which is why, and that's why kind of also I thought that what John Tortorella was talking about on Friday with Matvei Michkov, and like hating the word savior, and that it makes it all his show, because it can't be all his show. He's had his moments, and that's great that he does have his moments, but you can't just look at a 19-year-old and say you're going to totally steal the show every night. You're going to be the number 1 guy, and that's what's going to lead to wins right away.
Hey,
There's
it's
way
not
more to be
his
done.
show. I'm sorry, to preference at training camp, and I hate to interrupt, I'm sorry, but
No, go ahead.
John Tortorella, he was kind of speaking about, everything about Michkov, because us media, we couldn't get to him one day, and there was just a lot going on. And Tortorella says, this isn't the Mish show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about it all the time. I
He
mean,
kind of had another moment like that today. Like
yeah,
it's the same thing. He talked about it exactly the same way with this, that somebody like that it was either used at some point, the word savior was used, and it's like, don't put that on him. And there's still so much more to do to involve putting the right pieces around him, and he's still trying to figure things out and everything like that. That's where they are as a team. And I knew that going in. And I think that, like, again, it's another good tie into another topic we're going to have, is because I look at the team they're playing Saturday, the Chicago Blackhawks, and you can get Connor Bedard, and it doesn't mean you're any better of a team on day one because you added the number 1 pick, who may be a generational talent. By himself, it's not going to work that way. There needs to be more of a supporting cast. And that's all part of the
there's only
process.
one hockey player that was able to do that. And I bet you know who I'm thinking of.
Depends how far back are you willing to go.
far back enough to where there might be another player trying to beat one of his records.
Okay, then it is Gretzky.
Yeah, of course, Wayne Gretzky. He's the only player I could ever recall coming in to any team that he was on and making them good and relevant.
And that was a whole unique situation anyway, because they weren't even part of the league when he joined. He joined the Edmonton Oilers while they were still part of the WHA,
Yeah.
so it was a totally different
But it's a crazy
scenario.
thing to think about. I mean, he was on the Blues for literally 18 games, was named the captain, did great things. Management sucked. He left.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I say that because I think about all these star players. You think of Sidney Crosby, you think of his support system. You think of Ovechkin, you think of his support system. McDavid, his support system. You could probably name up to 2 to 3 players on each one of those teams that supports the star players. So then my thing is with Michkov, who is his support system? Because Konechny is not going to be around forever. And honestly, I thought maybe at training camp it could be Morgan Frost. Well, not anymore because he's first off getting scratched, which is an indication that it's not good between him and Tortorella. And Tortorella even said himself, I'm not going to coach him the same way I did for the past couple of years. So in my eyes, does Michkov even have a support system of players that are going to develop alongside him and be his right-hand man?
Like, and to me, that's the part that's still coming. Like, one of the first names to me that pops into my head when you ask that question about his support system is Jet Lachenko.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, he's not here right now, but he will be at some point. And even getting that little taste of 4 or 5 games in the NHL is a little something for me to take, to put in the back of my mind and be like, that's a player to keep an eye on later on. And certainly anybody else who they draft down the line, or that they've already drafted, honestly, like maybe Michkov, part of Michkov's support system down the line is Oliver Bonk or is Denver Barkey or somebody like that who makes an NHL roster eventually, but it's not there yet.
He's out. Yeah.
And I think it's great that you brought up Crosby in that mix too, because I think about where the Penguins are right now, and it's like some of that support system is kind of getting lost now because Crosby's still a great player, but as it fades away, and that's just what happens over time. The greatest dynasties will fade away over time.
David and Leon Draisaitl, like that's going to fade away one day. It is sad to see, like especially with an Ovechkin, like it's sad to see players that have been so dominant in the league kind of not having that same support because like they're still great players. But that was my biggest concern with Michkov is who is going to be his main guy.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like he's got a great support system around him for protection. Like I think that's abundantly clear. Guys jump into
Eric Johnson
all the time. And I was thinking of the Sean Couturier one in the preseason too. Like that's a guy who would jump in too. But I think like to your point, it's who's like you almost like you want to create that dynamic duo of sorts, and like for Flyers fans, maybe that's the connection, like either the connections you feel when you put the names Lindros and Leclerc together, or put the year that Peter Forsberg was here with Simone Gagne and they had a great year together, things like that, or even Richards and Carter, or the names like that you can put together and you feel like they go hand in hand with your success. Well, that happens around the league too. Like you just did it with McDavid and Draisaitl, and there's a bunch of other combinations you can do this with. It's who's that guy for him, and I don't know. I agree with you. I don't know that player is even here yet, and that's part of the building process. And but it also goes to for him to just continue to do the things that he can do to kind of acclimate himself to the game. Like I see him getting better in that area, and like to me, it's the game since he was scratched that I see him getting a little bit better at those areas away from the puck a little bit. Maybe not completely out in the neutral zone as far as he could be every single time. He's a little bit more involved in the play, or he'll get into a board battle a little bit more often than he was in the first 10 games of his career. Let's say he's doing a few of those things better, and it's only going to build if he continues to work on those things. But yeah, so like this is kind of setting the stage for the week that is to come. And I like, again, I think like all these topics really tie together in a way. The injuries and how they've affected the first quarter of the season, the development of Michkov, the fact that they're going to play Bedard and the Blackhawks on Saturday, and that opens up this week that leads into Thanksgiving. And when we get there, that's the marker for playoff teams and things like that. It's all kind of in there, and and it all kind of ties together. And maybe that's just the way that it is. Let me ask you, because I saw because the email came out from the league today about the quarter mark. Does it feel that way? Like, to me, like, that just caught me off guard that we're like a quarter of the way through the season already, to a degree. Like, it feels like it just started.
It feels like it just begun. And then I look at the date and it says November 22nd, but it feels
Right.
like, I mean, opening day for the NHL was October 8th. And I know the Flyers put a couple days later, but it just doesn't seem like it's been that long. But I also think at the same time, with the Philadelphia Flyers specifically, there has been a lot that's happened with just injuries of different players. So maybe for us, we feel like we haven't seen the team in full yet. But I don't think with the Philadelphia Flyers, you're going to ever see this team in full. So there's
Not
just
th
been a
Yeah,
lot.
not this year. Like,
No.
I like, there's too many elements that are missing, too many question marks. You bringing up Frost is a perfect example of that, because it's like, for him to sit out that long
I
too,
do
at the
feel badly for him, honestly, Kevin.
yeah,
Um,
I understand that for sure. I
can I
feel the
speak on
same
that
way.
for a sec?
Yeah.
Okay. So the problem that I have is I think Morgan Frost is actually a very good player, and I think that he does a lot of good things on the ice. Now, obviously, there's the turnovers and some sloppiness that accumulates when he's on the ice as well. But I do feel like the relationship between, and I know Kevin Kurz from The Athletic put something out too, but the relationship between him and Tortorella has never seemed to be good. And is it wrong for me to say that I feel like maybe a guy like Morgan Frost would succeed more on a team like the Leafs, or maybe another team, the Metropolitan, that I'm kind of hearing some rumors to, like the Penguins? I just feel like he is not being coached properly. And I'm not putting John Tortorella down in any way. I think he's an excellent coach, but sometimes players and coaches don't mesh. So, as much as I want Morgan Frost to succeed here as a Philadelphia Flyer, I also think there's a part of me looking at the player individually. I think there's a better chance for him to succeed on another team.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. To me, I think some of the question mark, because there comes a certain point for me where if I've seen a guy long enough, I sit there and I just kind of give in to they are who they are kind of thing. I don't completely think this is who Morgan Frost is. Like, I do think there's another level of points to a degree. I don't think he's ever going to be all-star quality point producer. I just don't think that's ever going to be in the
He's
cards.
like a solid, like third, fourth liner.
I think third is a great place to kind of put him.
Yeah.
What I kept coming back to is, because my opinion of Jet Lachenko changed a lot over training camp, and I started to see a guy who at least I felt like you could say maybe down the road has second line center potential. If that's the case, you're still going to need to find that guy who's top line material somewhere down the road. That's why a lot of the conversation is going to focus on this year's draft in particular. There's so many good centers in there that probably have that potential that you would want to explore. If you can get that guy too, and have Lachenko as maybe your second guy, like, I was moving forward totally content with a third and fourth that was Sean Couturier, Morgan Frost, because it's like you reduce the roles, you reduce the matchups, you change kind of the way things are a little bit. I never have a problem with those guys in terms of like defending ability and maybe just kind of keep maintaining play to a degree. I think where Frost struggles is getting around those areas for the offensive side, where he was so good at it in juniors that it kind of set this level that was almost impossible to meet.
Yeah.
And now I look and I go, I just don't know if he's ever going to have that and be more than that. Maybe something changes in a different, for a different location. Maybe something changes stylistically that allows him to score more, whether it's off the rush or maybe score more on a special team situation. But I just don't think at 5-on-5, he's never going to be the guy, I think, that's just going to stand right by the net and just pick up a bunch of rebounds or something like that. I don't ever really see him being that guy. It's more, but I do think his point production could go up if he played around guys who did play that way, and he was more of the setup guy. Like, I do see a way where that would work. So I don't know. I think it's like, it always gets interesting to me when it's like the idea that something's floated about, well, this could be a destination where somebody could go. I never read too much into that. Like, I know Elliot Friedman had something, I think, within the last week about Chicago being an option, which, again, ironic that that's who's coming into town, but
Yeah.
about that being an option. And I go, I don't even get that far ahead of it until there's way more traction behind it. Like, there's legitimate conversation going on and framework of a deal and all that stuff like that. Like, I just don't, like, I look at it right now and I go, I don't get the sense they're trying to trade him today, not
Not
before
today, but
Thanksgiving.
definitely before the deadline.
Later in the year, as the deadline definitely gets
Yeah.
closer, that's when I start to think about things like that too.
It's too early in November to make any trades like that.
Exactly. And I know that, like, on occasion there's always the odd, like the offhand trade that kind of comes up that you don't expect in November, let's say. I mean, like, I would even consider when Jamie Drysdale got traded here and Cutter Gauthier got traded to Anaheim, that was kind of an out of the blue trade for the timing of it. Like, it's January. That doesn't happen yet. Like, usually you get to late February before you start seeing that kind of stuff pop up. So it's interesting, but I think all of your points on Frost are totally valid. He's another guy, by the way, who is supposed to be back in the lineup on Saturday. So that, barring something unusual happening between now and the start of the game. And so we'll see, like, that's the response is another thing. Tortorella did kind of bring up the idea that, last year sitting out a little bit and having a conversation about it sparked him and gave him a good second half. Maybe the same thing happens here. I agree with you that that's not necessarily the way that he would need to be coached about it, but we'll see if it has the effect that they all hope it has. But I do get the sense also that, like, last year the frustration was picking up. It led to what was talked about with the conversation he had with Tortorella. Now I wonder if that's not going to have the same effect because it's just more frustration. I'm still not playing. Why am I still not playing? What do I have to do to get through here and break through? That can kind of lead to ugly things happening down the road in the months ahead. Like that, exactly what you were alluding to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, right now, just put the guys out there and see what they can do. But at the end of the day, if a couple of the younger guys do get traded, I would not be surprised. But yeah, it definitely was a little bit of an outlier situation when Drysdale and Cutter had that trade happen. We were all very confused in the press box too. Like, we saw it on Twitter and we're like, oh, and then all of a sudden Danny was about to speak. So
yeah, because that was how under wraps they kept the whole thing, that they really didn't want anything out there, so nobody even there was no way to prepare for that one as much. Like sometimes
who did they play that night?
Pittsburgh.
Okay. I remember that, like, they lost the game. I remember that, but I didn't even like focus on that. It was more towards I had to get this article up right now about Jamie and Cutter.
I've said that before in conversation about that night too. I did, so I absolutely remember who they were playing, and I do remember the final score ultimately because I had to write it down later on a few different times, whether it was in the article or whatnot. But I don't remember any other details about that game. I don't ask me how the goals were scored. I don't remember.
It's like the one game that I cannot remember, and I recall mostly every single game.
Yeah,
I can't look
absolutely.
at that game. All I remember is seeing a tweet, and then Danny was speaking at intermission and announced it. But Kevin, I also, speaking of that, I feel like there has to be more answers coming out eventually about why he didn't want to be in Philadelphia. I am curious. I really sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, I think about it.
That's one of those ones that I wonder if we're ever going to get an answer while he's an active player. Possibly, like that feels like a story that comes out when his career is over, almost like that. Now I'm willing to talk about, like I think about Eric Lindros got a little more open about what happened with Quebec and why he wouldn't play there after his career was over, more than he did while he was a player. And some of that had to do with the way, whether it was the way things ended in Philadelphia or the way his health was overall with the concussions and things like that. That does take over. But I think that that's exactly kind of the way that would play out, where we might find that out in 20 years if
That's okay. I'll wait.
If we're willing to wait that long.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Like,
oh gosh, 20 years from now. Jeez, I just thought about how old I'm going to
be. Speaking of which, Cutter Gauthier did finally get on the board in the past week, I think it was.
Yeah.
I saw, so he's got a couple of goals now. I think it happened. It ended up happening the game after Michkov scored the overtime winner. So it was that Saturday.
Well, Michkov did it first, so.
Well, Michkov had 6 by that point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He did it first, yeah.
And that particular night, Michkov passed up an opportunity on a 2-on-0. So
I have to tell you though,
which was a goal though.
Travis Konechny when they had that breakaway and it was a 2-on-1 was such an intelligent play. And it just goes to Michkov's hockey IQ. This guy is going to be an absolute legend here in Philadelphia. I really have a good feeling about him panning out to just be an absolute superstar.
Because what I love about the play, and I mentioned this somewhere else, was
you don't see that.
What I love is that if you're the goalie in that spot with the 2-on-0 happening, he's given away the move 3 times. He looked back at Konechny 3 times going up the ice. So he's looking for the help. And then he still pulls the leg kick move to freeze the goalie. That was what was incredible to me. And then Konechny ends up getting into a fight afterwards, kind of, because
because they came after Michkov.
Because Zach Benson tried to throw a hit after the goal was scored.
Yeah.
Yep. Didn't even really connect, by the way, which is even funnier about it. Like, he kind of whiffs on the hit.
Yeah.
And Konechny sees it though and is like, "No, we're still not doing this. Let's go. Let's go." So anyway, I think that's where we're gonna wrap this one up though. So, another great week of this. And next week when we do this, we're gonna shoot for the same day, Friday, but we're gonna try to do this a little differently because next Friday is the Flyers' annual Black Friday game. They play at home every time Black Friday rolls around. So Haley and I are going to be down at the game probably a little earlier than usual, and we're going to bring you Flyers talk a little bit earlier this time from the Wells Fargo Center, no less, and then basically shift gears right away. We'll finish recording it and shift gears right away pretty much into game day mode, where there will be a game going on against the New York Rangers. That's a common opponent for that weekend.
It is. I think
they play the Rangers all the time. I feel like the game after is always like something totally different. Like you're looking forward to it because it's going to be St. Louis again. So your worlds are colliding once again at the end.
Oh, absolutely. I love it.
But I like it. That one's all over the place. Same thing with the game, like the day before Thanksgiving. It's all over the place. For a long time, that game was always against the Islanders.
Yep.
And now it's kind of all over the place. Like, that's a crazy travel schedule to go from.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah, in Nashville, home for the Black Friday game against the Rangers, and then back on the road to play St. Louis.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah.
The schedule for all the NHL teams, though, this year, I have to say, is awful.
I was going to say, well, they started the year with 4 games in Western Canada. So that
so that's not setting the tone.
Didn't it set the tone for what, anything else that comes our way with this? But anyway, that'll do it for this episode of Flyers Files on 97.3 ESPN. For Haley Taylor Simon, I'm Kevin Durso. We'll see you next week.